Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Before we get started, I would love to do just a quick round of introductions with the panelists that we have here tonight. So I'll start off, Rich Cacioppo, Executive Director at US Rowing.
Hey everyone, I'm Jules Zane. I'm the Director of Member Services at US Rowing.
Hi.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Amanda.
Oh, that's okay. Amanda Stewart, Willis Towers Watson and Client Executive for US Rowing.
I'm Paul Becker, Chief Operations Officer for US Rowing.
I'm Tom Rooks. I'm the Director of Sports Safety and Operations at US Rowing.
And Scott Kessler with Willis Towers Watson as well, part of the service team that handles the broking responsibilities for placing the insurance program for US Rowing.
Great.
Good afternoon to those on the West Coast and evening to those on the East Coast.
I want to thank all of our panelists for joining tonight. It's truly been a team effort, and we thought it very important to have our partners at Willis Towers Watson here today to be able to answer specific questions and provide some additional context so that you're hearing more about this topic, not just from us as the governing body, but from our partners in the space. So I hope everybody's had the chance to read the letter that I sent a few days ago to all of our organizational members and their leaders. And so what we will try to do tonight is not repeat everything that was in that letter, but provide some highlights and some additional transparency and information behind where we are. And I think I'll take this opportunity now to start off with, why are we here? And not to sound overly dramatic about it, but we are at an inflection point for sport in general, for our sport, and for our organization. There are a few things that we've been under no illusions about as an organization the past couple of years. The first is the state and trajectory of the insurance market and providing comprehensive and valuable coverage to our members. The second is the concentration risk of that value proposition in insurance to our sports sustainability. And the third is the need for us to diversify that value as a governing body in service of our mission. And as we've thought about this, 2025 has been the year where we were looking to rebuild the program and really rethink what the next generation of value and peace of mind is for our sport. All signs up until a month ago yesterday pointed to a much more manageable increase in our insurance expense for 2024. That's through our conversations with Willis Towers Watson, the underlying carriers, and a lot of the work that the team has been doing this year on safeguarding. And before I move forward, I'll just take a moment to define safeguarding for those of you who aren't as familiar with the term. We define safeguarding as the range of measures that US Rowing employs to promote and protect the welfare of all participants, including their physical and psychological well-being. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on the specifics there, but if questions do come up, we'll obviously walk through that, and we have Tom here as well to talk through details. So all those signs that were pointing to a more manageable increase in 2024 turned out to be wrong. So what have we spent the past month doing? We've been diving deeper than we ever have been before as an organization with our partners at Willis Towers Watson to really do two things. One is to explore every option that existed to us across multiple carriers, as well as self-insurance programs. And two, to meticulously account for the risk exposure, not just within US Rowing as an organization, but for our sport as a whole. And this was all worth it for two reasons. One is we want to still be able to and believe we are still delivering a comprehensive program for all of our members that's built for our sport and done so at a significant discount to market rates for coverage. The second, and I think the more strategic and important one for us to discuss as leaders and as a community, is that we're doing the right and hard things now so that our sport can thrive in the future. And you will see this theme and see this not just be words, but actions from us in the coming years as we do those right and hard things now so that a generation from now, more and more people can enjoy our sport. So that's my preamble before we get into the nitty-gritty and the details. But what I'd like to do now is really kind of get to the bottom line. And what is that for our sport and for those of you on the call? The first is that for our Plus members, those that insure through us and our US Rowing insurance program will see significant cost increases in 2024. And you'll also see more granular tiers as we try to create a fairer pricing model across the different size clubs in our sport. The second thing that this means is that we will have new policy and coverage requirements for the 40% of our clubs who don't insure through us, who either use a third-party insurance program or self-insure. Those clubs will also see a $100 increase year over year, with every single one of those dollars going exclusively towards our safeguarding efforts. And third, new benefits that speak to the priority for club sustainability and growth. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this tonight because I know and understand why many joining might consider this window dressing. But I want to be very clear that the launch, which is our new learning and development platform that's focused first on club sustainability and growth, is the vehicle, particularly for our smaller clubs, to address the challenges that are preventing them from achieving the scale that they need. Second is Crew Lab, which we just announced the other day. That's our new partnership that we're very excited about to make coaches' lives easier and really to promote holistic athlete well-being. But I also want to be clear about our new Crew Lab value proposition, that is not driving a single dollar of the cost increases that we'll review tonight. So moving on to some of the numbers, I want to make sure that everyone on the call is aware of the trajectory that we've been on. So the blue bars are our historical dues and sanctioning revenue, individual, organizational, and regatta sanctioning fees. The red bars are our insurance expense year over year. And the gray line is the insurance expense as a percentage of those dues and sanctioning revenue year over year. If you look at 2018 and 2019, you'll see that we didn't eclipse 20% of insurance expense as a percentage of dues. In the COVID year, while we certainly saw increases, this is a little bit swayed by the fact that we saw much lower overall member dues revenue because of lockdown that started in March of 2020. But once you start seeing in 2021 moving forward is a significant increase in insurance expense as a percentage of dues. Throughout this entire time, what we've been trying to do as US Rowing is subsidize those increases in order to protect the recovery post-COVID for our organizations. As a result, one term that you'll hear me use a few times tonight is a CAGR, or a compound annual growth rate. That's basically if you take from a starting period and an end period, the average annual increase. So since 2018 through 2023, we've only had a 6% average annual increase in our member dues and sanctioning fees, but our insurance expense has grown on an average of 30% per year. So you can already see how this model is increasingly becoming unsustainable, but we made a thoughtful, intentional trade-off to allow our clubs and our sport to bounce back post-COVID. So this is what we were confronted with a month ago yesterday. The initial quotes that we received from carriers had us at a 76% increase year over year, with an absolute value increase of plus 1.2 million. That would have resulted in insurance expense being 64% of member dues in 2024. And by 2026, on this trajectory of member dues and sanctioning fee growth, insurance expense would have eclipsed the total member dues and sanctioning fees we collect from our sport. So just to be clear about this, within a couple of years, at the pace that we were at a month ago, we would not have had a sustainable organization. So the good news is that we found a solution in partnership with WTW and a lot of work done by our teams. But I just want to pause on this for a second so that everybody's clearly aware of the challenge that we were facing and what we were trying to resolve over the past month. So then the next question really that we have to address here is what is driving this so much? What is causing this substantial and significant increase? And before I go into this, I do want to highlight that this is not just rowing. This is industry-wide and also specific to multiple sports. In fact, several NGBs, national governing bodies of sport, that provide insurance coverage to their members, it's typical that 50% of their member dues are going to insurance expense. And many of those NGBs also require every participant to participate in their insurance program, which we do not. So we have three different trends that are occurring and things that are happening that are driving these increases. The first is the insurance market overall and overall industry trends. That's really being driven by two core components. The first is sexual abuse and molestation coverage, which is driving overall market and sports-specific challenges to insure and insure at an affordable rate. The second is what's considered to be called social inflation, driving overall liability risk. And those are things like the increase in wealth disparity, declining trust in institutions, and a very aggressive plaintiff's bar that also happens to be increasingly funded by the financial industry. All of those components are rapidly changing the landscape for the industry and the risk when carriers are underwriting that, not just for governing bodies of sport, but for the industry overall. The second driver of this increase in insurance expense is rowing's risk profile, just as a baseline. We are a low frequency, high cost risk profile. And what that means is things don't often go wrong, but when they go wrong, they go very wrong. And while we've managed that risk historically, and I'm very confident in the work that we're doing as an organization, and specifically the work that Tom is doing moving forward, there are some elements of this risk that we cannot escape in the sport that we participate in. The third component are historical claims. And I want to be very clear that I will not speak to any specific claims on this call or address any questions of those, but both actual losses from claims going back several years, as well as reserves established based on the assessment of how those losses will play out, have factored materially in carrier assessment of our pricing and our risk profile. So I've tried to do that at a high level, but I am not the expert as the folks that are on this call are. So what I'd love to do is hand this over to Willis Towers Watson to provide any additional context.
Apologies, I had to unmute myself. So, Rich, actually, job well done in terms of what we're seeing in the marketplace. So, I'll start at a high level by saying, even to begin with, there are not a lot of insurance carriers that will write a national governing body. So, if this was an association of widget manufacturers, we would have a significant number of carriers that we could speak to about insurance and what that would look like. There are a handful, and I'm talking 10, that will write a governing body. And even within those, they have certain guidelines of what they want to look for. So supply and demand right off the bat is a challenge because there are not many markets that will quote on the business. On top of that, the national governing body space, sports and entertainment in the aggregate have had a dramatic impact on the overall loss experience for those carriers that do write and have an appetite for this class of business. It has been about a 2 to 3 year period of time where there's just been a dramatic increase in the number of claims, losses, and significant losses. You add to that the social inflation that Rich talked about, liberal class action certification, desensitized jury pools, litigation funding. In 2020, $12 billion was put into the market for litigation funding alone. And in the 2000s, there were certainly large claims and large verdicts, but in 2019 alone, there was a 300% rise in verdicts over $20 million. So we are talking about what we call nuclear verdicts in this day and age, where you historically may not see an umbrella claim, and then now all of a sudden we're seeing losses, and the carriers are looking at losses and trying to fund for future losses to the tune of $20 million verdicts that are being handed out, if not higher. So all of that has driven a pretty tough marketplace in the aggregate, as Rich alluded to. U.S. rowing is unique in a lot of ways, including the fact that you're on the water. And that in and of itself is a very big exposure, as you would know. Add to that boathouses and premises exposure associated with that. It's different from even other governing bodies. So as carriers look at the risk profile, that those are certainly aspects of the underwriting that is being done when we have discussions with carriers that are currently on the program, and as well as prospective carriers. That's driving a lot of what we're talking about, and some of the numbers that Rich has outlined in the beginning of this presentation. Rich, hopefully that addressed what you are looking for there. If there's anything else, we can certainly take it during Q&A.
Absolutely. No, that very much appreciated, Scott. Thank you. So then let's cut to the chase. What does this actually mean next year for changes in member dues and sanctioning fees? So understanding this is a bit of an eye chart, but want to make sure we got it all on one page. a few things to make clear. Standard organizational membership for those organizations that have third-party insurance or self-insure is going up by $100. That price was $375 back in 2018 and represents less than a 10% CAGR since that time, despite the significant increases in our administrative costs. And I also want to make sure it's very clear that every single dollar of this increase in 2024 is going to funding the safeguarding efforts that we have a responsibility for as a governing body across the entire sport, not just those clubs and individuals who are insured by us at US Rowing. The second are the increases to our plus plans. Those are our clubs that are paying by tier based on their club size for insurance. In 2023, we only had 4 tiers of price points. While I am certainly no fan of adding complexity, the trade-off here was around ensuring that we were granular enough to make it fairer pricing for all of our club members. And there are 2 things that we're balancing here. One is ensuring that we're establishing a program and making it clear that there is a fixed cost for insurance, regardless of how small your club size is. So you will see those increases hit on the smallest clubs. But the other is that I think we've gotten too far away from our largest clubs paying their fair share. And we'll look at a little bit more detail in the next slide. So what we are trying to do, and is by no means a perfect process, is create a manageable number of tiers and keep the pricing as fair as possible, while still letting clubs who grow and scale benefit from the economies of scale they get from larger clubs. Important to note here as we go on to the individual side is that with one small exception, we are keeping all individual dues flat in 2024 after 2 years of increases that were necessary for us to get to more sustainable place from individual membership. One of the primary drivers of us not increasing individual member dues at all is that not all of our individual members benefit from our insurance program. So the days of any cross-subsidization are over. And as we talk about 2025 and rebuilding the membership program more holistically, that is going to be a critical tenet for us to make sure that our individual members who don't benefit from our program are not cross-subsidizing that for those who do. And then finally, our sanctioning fees are going to increase at 50% roughly across the board in line with our overall insurance costs. On the individual membership side, one thing I will highlight, because I did say there was a small exception, is that we are going to be moving to a supporter membership for those members, so board members, support staff who are not coaches who come to regattas. The reason for this increase is because we have an actual variable cost to support safeguarding efforts, including Safe Sport, for every single member who's covered, including these supporters and board members. So you will see that move from a free membership to a $10 membership next year. And providing a little bit more detail for the group here so you can see how it impacts you by the size of your club. Here's the historical price points that clubs paid based on their organization size, going all the way back to 2018. This shows the 2024 price, the increase those clubs will see year over year, the annualized average growth rate of that, and the average dollar increase per member. And there's a lot of math behind here and a lot of details, but this is meant to give a high-level overview of what this increase looks like at the dollar per member level based on the size of your club. And at the bottom, again, you'll see the overall historical increase in these costs over the same time period. I'll pause on this for another few seconds. Obviously, all of this material will be available to you, so don't feel like you need to take notes. We'll make sure that you're able to access this deck, and we are also recording the session. And now I'm going to hand it over to Jules, our Director of Member Services, to talk about the changing policy requirements for those clubs that choose not to insure with us.
Yes, thank you, Rich. I think what's going to be posted here and what's in this presentation are a number of kind of the highlighted requirements that we want to point out. If you go to our website, you will find an even more elaborate document that will outline the requirements that we're looking for. A lot of these might already be part of the policies that you have. We reviewed a lot of COIs, and some people might be, at a point where they have to add things because they're not currently insured for it, but they should be. While in other cases, some of you might find that it is not a change. It's simply that we are clarifying what we're looking for from our members. To go over those highlights, general liability insurance, you need $1 million per occurrence and a $2 million aggregate. Part of the requirement for the aggregate, especially to highlight, is that if you have a catastrophic loss, like Rich said, relatively low risk, but when something goes wrong, it might go very wrong. And if you exhaust those $1 million, you are not entirely out of insurance should another thing occur. And so an aggregate limit is crucial, and it cannot just be 1 and 1, which means that if there were something catastrophic, you'd really only be insured for a single loss. Similarly, we are requiring for all teams the inclusion of sexual abuse and molestation insurance. That's not automatic with your general liability. And there are really 2 reasons to do this. One is, and I think most importantly here, is that if you are not insured for something, you also don't have defense coverage for that. Meaning that even if you are in fact not at fault for something that occurs, and the allegation is something that might be with a different party than you, if you're not insured for this, you still have to pay the legal fees. In most cases, and this is something that you should verify with your agent and with your insurance carrier, if you have sexual abuse and molestation coverage and a claim of that type is made, what is included in that coverage is the coverage is cover in terms of cost for legal for your team. And so unfortunately, I think the other thing that I wanted to highlight here is that a lot of people, including in some of the emails I've gotten in the last few days, said, well, why are you making this mandatory? I'm a masters only team. This sounds like a youth problem to me. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Without going into details, obviously, when we look at the volume of abuse claims that come in, allegations of improper behavior, people who simply feel unsafe at their club, there are a very large amount of those are unfortunately at masters teams and between adults. And this is certainly not exclusively a youth problem. And if someone were to pursue action against your team, you'd be on the hook for the legal cost of that. And we just want to make sure that you're covered for that. Additionally, U.S. Rowing must be named an additional insured. That's not new. That was a requirement last year as well. Part of that is the trend that people will name as many parties as they can in terms of a claim, and U.S. Rowing and potentially other parties that you do business with, maybe the owner of the property that you row out of, are, they don't all want to have to cover for an event that was caused by you as a team. By setting up additional insured status, you are assuming kind of the primary role if a claim comes in, which is protection for people that you do business with. And then, the other ones, coverage cannot have a player versus player exclusion. This is something that we have seen with some of our members, have highlighted with some of our members. This is something that has come up with carriers that we've talked to who had this as part of their plan. A cross-suit exclusion means that people who are insured or part of the name insured cannot essentially sue or be covered for things that happen between people under the same policy. An example of that would be if a coach accidentally injures an athlete with the launch, or athletes would injure each other. Suddenly you're not insured for that. And I don't think anyone, especially if you were to be a coach, wants to be working for a team where if they were to injure or cause a claim related to someone that's part of the same insurance policy, all of a sudden you're not actually insured, even though we all know that in our sport, you mostly interact with the people who are at your club. And it's, based on our experience, far likelier that something happens when, you're on a day-to-day practice, you're just out there in the morning. A fairly limited number of our claims stem from regattas and competition, and it's mostly things that happen during day-to-day operations. We are asking our teams to verify that the coverage is appropriate for motorized and human-powered boats. A funny example of that was, and I think Amanda and Scott might remember this, when we were going through the details at the very first time and we were setting up the program with them, we found that there was essentially coverage for some of the activity, but there was a limitation to the length of the boat. And the length of the boat that was limited, the number they had put in the policy originally, was just a couple feet short of the standard length of an 8. And we actually had to go back and be like, hey, just to explain this, you understood our sport really well, but we need to stretch this by a couple feet. And so that is an odd example, but if something were to have happened, it would potentially have given your carrier, if this is in your plan, a backdoor to say, oh, the incident involved an 8. Well, that boat was too long and we don't owe you this. You should have read the small print. So we want to make sure that everyone's covered for those. And then additionally, you cannot exclude property that's in care, custody, and control, meaning that if you have items at your boathouse, such as the shells of your members, you have to make sure that your coverage extends to that, and that it's not excluding things that have been given in your care, as in this example. And additionally, that it must be applicable to the member premises. So it's not just coverage for what happens outside of your regular space, and also that you have coverage for premises that were rented to you. An example of that was a policy that we reviewed where if the team had gone out and erged in a different space or had rented a space for storage, that would have not been included in their liability insurance, which is obviously not a situation that you want to be in if your members cause accidental damage to a space that you're operating from. So please go to our website, review the sample COI, review the examples that we've been given, that we're giving you with that. But those are things that we are looking for. I don't want to, I didn't want to outline all these things to be alarmist and say, oh, these are all things that you might not have. Chances are a lot of these things you have, you might have all of them. Chances are you have all of them, but we just want to make sure that you and your coverage is in a place where you are properly covered, but also that the members that are using our plan and the value that we believe in and the limits that we believe in, that those members are properly protected when they go out on the water and compete against you, or you go to a scrimmage, or you're sharing a waterway with them. We don't want to give our blessing as an organization to the activities of a team where we know that if the catastrophic thing happens or something occurs on their premise, that they're not properly insured, because at that point, you as a team might have insurance, but you don't actually have insurance to protect the longevity of your team. You're really only insured to operate until the catastrophic thing happens, which would then be the end of your program. And we just want to make sure that if, despite the low risk, that if the bad thing were to happen to you, that does not mean that your program has to wind down, liquidate everything you own just to pay out a bill that it turns out you were not insured for. We would hate to see that. And that's a huge part of this. So certainly we will continue to support teams, as we always have, who don't use our insurance program. As Rich said, that is 40 to 45% of US Rowing members. It certainly doesn't make you an outlier in our program. We have hundreds of member clubs that don't opt into the plus options, but we are going to make sure that those member clubs are not operating in a way that is, potentially a danger to others or to themselves.
No, thank you, Jules. That's very helpful. The one point I just really want to reinforce here is that none of this is trying to drive more people to our insurance program. This is exactly about Jules's point about ensuring that we have the proper risk mitigation and the proper landscape in place for all participating in this sport. As I've learned much more than ever I ever thought I would about the industry and the details of this, I do believe that we are offering an amazing value for our members. This year, greater than a 30% discount to market rates for comparable coverage. But I just want to reiterate the fact that in no way, shape, or form is this us trying to drive more people to our insurance program. It has long ceased to be a sustainable program for us, as you can see. And so I just want to reinforce that once more for this community. So here's where we landed. And while it's still not great news, all of the panelists on this Zoom tonight deserve an immense amount of credit for the hard, thoughtful, deep work that went into doing this on behalf of our members, and really a member-first approach to how do we come up with a program that works. So while it's still not great news, we are looking at approximately a $700,000 increase year over year. That's plus 45% year over year. And we will be at roughly 46% of member dues and sanctioning fees attributable to our insurance expense. But make no mistake, the path that we are on is still an unsustainable future, and we'll get to that in a bit. But this is kind of where we have landed for the year. The next thing that I want to just highlight and remind folks of is the beginning of 2023, we established a new operating model for the organization. And I think historically, we were not as clear and consistent and disciplined as we should have been around where our member dollars go and reinvesting that back into the everyday member experience. So I just want to take a moment to highlight where we are at right now. This is preliminary. It's pending budget approval, which we will have before the end of January. But what I want to highlight here is just at a very high level, allow everybody on this call to see where those member dollars are expected to go in 2024. And I won't drain these slides with all the details of the work that we're doing, but I did want to at least provide a high level view over this. And I think it should be an indication of what you should expect from us as a governing body in the future with far more detail, is full transparency into where those member dollars are going, how we are prioritizing investment, how we are assessing the success of the work that we're doing, and how we're measuring ourselves. So this is a continued work in progress for us as an organization, but I want you to hear directly from me that this is what you will see more and more of moving forward from us. And then looking ahead, as I talked about earlier, this is not a surprise for us, the path that we have been on. The timing of it was not expected, and in fact, getting a lot of the positive feedback from our carrier partners over the summer and in the fall before this came through. And just to reiterate a point that Scott made, the only reason that we had options in the market at all was because of the safeguarding work that we had already been doing. And had it not been for all the great work that Tom and the team had been doing, and I think as an organization, the priority that we've been putting on safeguarding, and frankly, putting our money where our mouth is, we would not have had the options that we did. Now, that being said, this is an unsustainable future. And in 2025, we will be rebuilding the program from scratch. I mentioned one of the examples in which that will change is ensuring that there's no cross-subsidization of our individual members who don't benefit from our insurance plan. But more broadly, in Q1, we're going to be doing a few things. One is going to be refining some of the option models and the value propositions that we've thought through for some time. The second is outreaching to our community to have a series of town halls and working sessions around the options so that everybody who's part of our community can be part of what the solution looks like moving forward. That's going to be quite critical for us. And also, I think the seeds that we've already planted for a more diverse value proposition to you as our members should start blooming, and we can see the benefits of that coming through. The second is that our investment in safeguarding is going to increase thoughtfully and with an eye towards the return on investment and holding ourselves accountable to every dollar that we spend and every project that we prioritize. But I have every confidence in Tom and the team that he's building around the work that we're doing there. And third is the launch. We made a very intentional strategic decision to prioritize driving value to our organizational members first, then to our coaches, and then to our end athletes, because our clubs and our coaches are the ones who interact with our members on a day-to-day basis. So our thought process was, if we can help clubs and coaches sustain and grow, then the rest will take care of itself. So what you will see from us, and in the letter that I sent is a link to the 3-year roadmap for the launch, is exactly the investments that we're making in the specific modules and curriculum to help clubs be more successful, whether that's DEI efforts, safety, safeguarding, fundraising, finance and accounting, operations management, and scale. Those are all things you will see from us next year and in 2025 to help clubs. And with that, those are all the main slides that we had tonight to review. And I think there are a few Q&A coming through. Jules, do you want to kind of round the bases on those?
Yes, absolutely. There was a question from Suzanne Rutkowski. She asked, and Tom gave her Tom wrote out a private answer regarding the swim test that he'll talk about publicly as well. But her question was historical claims. What was the percentage or the mix at the club level versus at the NGB level? And again, without going into the details, the number of NGB claims is very limited to the point that and they mostly cross my desk, can't recall one that was specifically a claim in which U.S. Rowing was named, if it wasn't for a claim that was like side to side with like a club. So, for example, I would essentially say that 100% of all claims are related to a member organization, and that in a very limited number of claims, probably 5 to 10%. We see that people are either including U.S. Rowing simply as the NGB because that's now a common practice, because people kind of want to loop more parties in to see if they can stretch limits and extend their claim and such. But in the end, I can't think of a single claim in the time that I've been overseeing the program, which has been about 4 years now, in which a liability claim or a SAM claim was specific to U.S. Rowing itself. Essentially, our program exists to cover our member organizations. And in some cases, that might have been something that occurred at a US Rowing hosted event, but obviously we partner with a venue and it might have been their volunteer. So I don't want to say it's never been US Rowing, but it's not originating from, say, national team practice or US Rowing's own activities. It is very much a part of our sanctioned events and a part of our member organizations. And it's almost 100 to 0% blend in terms of that. Tom, if you want to answer the part about the swim test.
I appreciate the question about the swim test, which was, I think, oriented about, the periodicity of swim tests and what the requirement came to. We added that this year because one of the risk challenges we face, and as we're getting more data about the accidents and injuries we see, our goal is to put out lessons learned and messaging that can sort of cut down on those risks. So the big one for us is simply that every person at a rowing club, we need to either observe them pass a swim test, have them fill out a swim verification form to whatever standard that is appropriate for your club, or they need to be wearing a life jacket. The question about the word annual, I'm going to look into. I don't know if that was intentional, and if it wasn't, we'll get rid of it, right? But the point is that everybody's verifying that your member either has done a swim test in front of you, or has passed a swim verification form, or they will be wearing a life jacket. That was really the goal of that. Just to a slightly broader question, because it does come up about, I get a lot of emails about how often should we be swim testing members, and these come a lot from masters clubs where the swim test from 1984 might be the last time we verified somebody could swim. That's really up to your club, and with most of the risks, the reason you don't see a national specific standard of a proper swim test is X is we don't know the temperature of the water you row in. We don't know the current of the water you row in. We don't know what times of year you're going to choose to row and not row. And also the boat types you might use. We might, if we row nothing but heavyweight pairs versus a lightweight 8, we're probably going to have a different risk profile there as far as people hitting the water, right? So we want you to calculate your risks and mitigate them as best you can. But I appreciate that question because we get that a lot.
Sorry, question on the logistics of making the deck available. Rich, where are we going to post it?
Hold on a second, can you hear me? Yeah, we can find that we will either send it to all participants or just post it on our website and make sure the link is available to everybody.
Okay.
We want to make sure this content is available. I would just also encourage everybody to treat it as a companion presentation to the letter that I sent the other day, which has a lot more detail and links to other information regarding things we talked about tonight.
Great, thank you. Tom, back to you really quick. What do you consider a minimal swim skill test in terms of like the basis for it?
Yeah, hey Chris. Reading through our own standards, we recommend 10 minutes and then donning a life jacket. There are other clubs like where I've coached where we will say we want you to swim 100 meters as well, or some clubs, because they exclusively row singles, they'll say, well, swim test for us also includes getting back in a boat. My goal of the swim test essentially is that one, somebody can stay afloat in the conditions that they're likely to be in, and that they can stay afloat for as long as in your situation they're likely to get help. For example, with a Masters Rowing Club, that might be a different profile of the access to a safety launch because they might choose to row alone. They're rowing a double in the morning by themselves. So then where is that nearest help going to come from, and how long would you probably have to stay with the boat, hope you have a flotation device of some sort, and be okay? Whereas that is going to be very different for youth programs where we dictate that we mandate that there be a safety boat present for all youth rowers. So then you're going to have a different risk there as far as that youth rower's access to help. So that's why I don't come up. I really am very resistant to saying, here's the universal standard, because whatever the concern there is, whatever we say is the universal standard becomes the only standard. And that's really not appropriate for the different risks that different clubs and situations present.
Great, thank you, Tom. Scott, a question that I'll answer partially, and then I'll punt to you. We signed on with you as an agent. I guess it's 4 renewals ago, but 3 years ago, when we left the program that we were in. What has really changed in the past few years? And I think it is important for me to point out that the trend of the increasing cost was happening before we made the switch. When I joined US Rowing, the annual insurance bill was under $600,000 a year. By the time we made the switch, the renewal with the plan we were on at the time was already at about 1.1 million. And it wasn't an auditable policy. That was a big part of the concern we had at the time. It was if the pandemic were to take longer than it did eventually, the policy we used to be on wasn't auditable, meaning that if we had fewer members, we weren't paying less money for insurance. And with the product that we switched to with W2W, that became an option, meaning that if we don't, something happens again, doesn't have to be a pandemic, could be some other reason why fewer people would row. Part of the cost is audited based on actual numbers and would come down. But other than that, would you be able to speak kind of like what changed in the last 3 to 4 years causing the increases that we're seeing now?
Yeah, sure. So it's a good question. I'm going to reiterate what I said a little earlier in terms of social inflation in the insurance industry and as a whole. It has just had a dramatic impact to pricing that insurance carriers are trying to contemplate when they're underwriting and pricing for general liability, especially for an industry such as national governing bodies that has in the aggregate had just a pretty dramatically poor loss experience across all sport. It has just been a traumatic 2 or 3 years for the insurance carriers and the industry and the claims that are being paid. It's being driven by SAM. Let me tell you, they're underwriting 3 things: SAM, and then vicarious liability. That's what they're underwriting for. That goes back to some of what Jules said as to why we're trying to make sure that those that are not insured in the program, that the coverage is comprehensive, because what happens is US Rowing is going to be sued. The member organization is going to be sued. The coach is going to be sued. Some other, the person, the landlord is going to be sued when there's something that happens on the premises. That's driving a fair amount of this. And there's been loss experience specific to the US Rowing program that over the last 3 or 4 years has also been impactful. And some of that is just because of what's called IBNR, incurred but not reported. There's a tail between a lag time between when the claim actually occurred and when it presents itself and what happens in that period of time. So those are probably 3 to 4 factors that have become impactful to US Rowing and really all organizations, all governing bodies. Hopefully that answered the question.
Thank you, Scott. Let me see. There was an additional question here. Are all US Rowing current members covered, or must they be on the US Rowing roster of a club they are rowing with to be covered while rowing at that club? Yes. So in order for an individual to be covered, not just at a regatta, but at a practice, and really in any and all instances, they must carry an individual membership with US Rowing and have signed their waiver and a member agreement. So if you have a claim that's being caused by someone who isn't signed up with us, they're not protected as an individual. And I always give this example when I'm on the phone with clubs. So apologies if you've heard me do this before and say this, but there's a huge difference, say, between something happens on your dock that's a result of bad maintenance or a faulty dock. If something happens on the dock and it's bad maintenance, you are responsible for that as the entity, the club. But, and this is a real claim that it's relatively benign that I don't mind mentioning, but we had a coach that was injured by an athlete who carelessly picked up an oar and swung it around and struck that coach, and the coach suffered an injury. That is not the fault of the club. That's the fault of the individual that caused it. And for US Rowing to cover that individual, we need to have a record of that individual. They can't become a member afterwards. And if they're not in our system and they didn't sign a waiver and we have no record for them, they're not an insured. And part of that is in the language of the policy that any Plus member can review. It says it's for people for who it's for individuals and insureds for who a premium has been paid. And so as a result, we have memberships for clubs, but we also have memberships for individuals, and everybody needs to be on your roster if they're day-to-day rowers. they just need to be on that roster at all times. And so what's very important, and I do want to emphasize is your roster is not cumulative for the year. So if you have 50 people in the spring and 25 of them leave, and you have 25 new people after the spring, and then that's 50 at all times. That's not 75 because you have new people coming in. It's not everybody over the course of the year. It's everybody at any given time. And so we want people to buy a plus membership for the time and for their peak for the year. But simultaneously, I want to emphasize that please go into your roster and archive everybody that's gone, because and this is new for this year because we had some issues with it last year. Teams were buying a tier that was below the number of active people they had on their roster. So from and even the number of like active members. So they would have 80 people with a basic membership on their roster, but purchase insurance for 50 people. That means that something is wrong. Like either you're allowing people to be on your roster and go to regattas and be insured by you, but you're not paying us, you're not paying the premium that's with that, or you're not maintaining your roster. And so this year, there's actually a calculator in the system now. You can see the number of active people on your active roster, and you cannot select a tier that goes below that number. So if you're looking at that and you're saying, I don't have 230 people, I have 150, that means you actually have to go into your roster on the profile and clean up the roster in order to purchase the level that you're actually at. And so there are certainly, like, it's not cumulative, like we're not looking at that top total number of everybody that passed through your doors at any point in the year, but yes, everybody should be on the roster and everybody should hold individual membership, including your coaches. I saw the question that followed up on that in terms of like club size. Well, the peak is important. So if you have a summer camp that balloons the number of people that come through your boathouse by dozens of people, putting you essentially into the next level, you have to purchase for that next level. Like in the end, if something were to happen at that time, which because of the number of people that is there might be the likeliest time that something happens, you have to purchase for that. And so, yes, it is, even if the person is not continuing after the summer, if they are coming to your boathouse more than 3 times, they are a recurring participant, and it's crucial that you purchase the membership tier for that. Another question is, are coaches covered by the insurance? Yes, liability insurance extends to you, like I said, as long as you are an individual member of US Rowing. Let me see. What other questions there are? Tom, question for you. Where would the swim verification form be? And I'll go to that in a second. And then question more for me. If someone currently has our coverage, is there a possibility to change to another provider in the middle of the year? No. So essentially, if you haven't used it and you haven't had activities, etc., we could work something out at the very beginning of the year. The moment you start practices and you're going to a regatta, that means you're using it. That means that there is tail risk. If someone comes to us, Scott just made that point, like people might come years later, and because our policy is occurrence-based, that means that someone can make a claim about something in the past, and the insurance company is still on the hook for say this year. At that point, there's tail risk for the program, and we would not be able to like reimburse you for any sort of difference. So if you're committing for the year, as soon as like prior to the start of any sort of activities that you have, because otherwise you're not insured either, then we can't refund. Obviously, if that's not the case, then I can send me an email, and given circumstances, I be willing to work something out.
The quick answer to the swim verification form is we don't create one. Clubs create their own. We won't be creating one, because again, it's the same explanation as earlier on us setting a national swim test policy. Is if I set a swim verification, if we say this is a swim verification form, here's what it entails, then that will become like the lowest common denominator becomes a national standard, which is really not our goal. Please do whatever you think is appropriate for your club as far as that goes. And there's just a really quick one I'll address too about when will we look at that word annual and taking out of the membership agreement. We'll get right on that tomorrow. That's just I think that might be close to an anomaly, and I just got to verify the people that is such, and then we'll address it. But that shouldn't be something that takes a month to fix. and it won't be a problem for anybody until they decide to do a swim test or re-verify and say, hey, that annual thing's still here. So we'll take care of it well before it's been here, but I'm going to get on it tomorrow. I'll drop a note and work with our team on it. And I appreciate you guys bringing that up. I really do.
I'd like to address a question. There was I'm going to paraphrase this question a little bit, but was wonder, a small team that now US Rowing Insurance would be more than half of their annual revenue. And does that mean having to forego safety repairs, not doing training, et cetera? This is a really hard conversation to have, right? So the first thing that I want to say is that, the critical point for us is that we live in a world where scale wins, whether we like it or not. And small clubs that are operating subscale are going to struggle to sustain no matter what. And insurance is not and should not be the thing that creates that lack of sustainability. One of the things that we saw over the period before, during, and after COVID is that despite the fact that we have kept insurance costs artificially even lower for our smallest clubs than we have for the rest of the community in order to try to spur on growth, it hasn't worked. We have not grown our small clubs. Those smallest clubs were the first ones to shut down during COVID and have not come back. And there are certainly exceptions, and we want to keep our eye out on that. But I do not think that we were doing our community or the growth of our sport any favors by even more so artificially reducing the baseline costs for insurance. So I think that's the hard part of the message, is that I think there's a broader question to ask for those of you in incredibly small clubs. Are you building something that can become self-sustaining? Are you building something that's going to be able to address the needs of the community and bring the sport that we love so much to them in a way that is lasting? And that's exactly why we're so focused on the launch and providing the tools and resources for you to do that.
Okay. Let me dive into a couple of more questions here. Can clubs get some help from US Rowing in terms of being notified when a member renews? We'd like to ensure they renew without checking the roster daily. Yeah, that's a good question. If you can set, yeah, I can take that back to the team. We work with Regatta Central. They built our database. I think some teams might want to be able to opt out of that if they have a couple hundred members and they're getting emails every day. Oh, this person has renewed and this person has renewed. Yeah, let me go back and see if there's something we can do where you get a little bit more insight than just using the roster. In fact, I know one of the people on my team that is doing the development is listening and just pinged me and said, I'll add it to our roadmap. So we'll talk to our team and see what we can do. Are there any videos that explain kind of what I've been explaining? Well, one of the things we're working on is adding a lot of this information into the launch so that admins and coaches at clubs can access this in terms of a training that they can complete. So you, one, as a program director, know that they saw it. And in addition, kind of that's where all our videos are going to live. So in terms of the info about what you need to do and where to find it and how the process works online, we're building that out as we speak and are launching a lot of those courses in really the coming weeks and the coming months. What about guest rowers who are members of other clubs and row with you 1 to 3 times? They don't count towards your totals. If someone is a guest rower and they don't row somewhere else, they can just sign a waiver, a paper waiver, and that's fine. And we're not considering that. And if someone has a membership somewhere else, they can probably show you that on their phone and they're good to go as well. So someone who's coming to your boathouse because they're in town for the weekend are not a concern. If you have more members join in the summer than expected, is there a way to increase? Absolutely. Send an email to my team, members@usrowing.org. Let us know. We do monitor. We send out a bunch of emails to some teams in the fall and monitored along and said, hey, your roster is getting a lot bigger than what you purchased, and we need you to either clean up the roster or buy up. And thank you to everyone who cleaned up. That was the case for the majority of teams. It wasn't so much that people were underreporting their size. I did mention more than 3 times. So the question is, if there's a learn to row over a weekend, do they need to gross up the coverage? The answer is no. If it's for up to 3 days, that is just a learn to row program. You just collect waivers, and we do not necessarily need to see that in your plus tier. So if you have a lot of short-term learn to row, that's absolutely not a concern. And those people just coming into the door to give it a try, please welcome them, have them sign, and with a date and a signature on a paper version of the waiver that you can find on our website as well. But that is sufficient. Great question on group entry for, say, summer campers or athletes. There is already a group entry feature where on the roster you can click add. It only asks for the name, the email address, the date of birth, and the gender of the athlete. And then you can actually make a bulk buy of membership for all those new people that you just added. That sends an email to them. They still have to complete their profile, mostly for insurance purposes and in order to sign the waiver. So there will be some steps. But in terms of you incurring the cost, you can bulk pay for people. If you need any, a demo of how to do that or any assistance from my team doing it, again, members at usrowing.org, or my email is jules.zane@usrowing.org. I'm happy to assist there. Let me see. This might be a question for you, Tom. And if not, we can answer it. Maybe through Pamela and have an email sent. But do Plus members who get SAM coverage through US Rowing, do all volunteers require a background check?
So without some of the detail on that would be kind of situational, but what I would say is anybody who's required to have safe sport training through their contact with youth athletes is going to find themselves in that, pretty quickly into that situation of, you're going to want to have a background check before you say that this person is now getting access in an authoritative role routinely with kids at your boathouse.
Yep. And I know that in terms of our policy there too, is that if it's not a role where you have oversight over the minors for an extended period of time, so say you're not chaperoning at a hotel or in a bus, it's not required. If it's essentially 5 encounters or fewer, we require that they're what we call MAP aware, which is minor abuse prevention policy. We just want to make sure that you at least tell your volunteers, hey, if you see something, here's how you say something and what that looks like. That doesn't necessarily require them to do the full background check, and it doesn't require them to do safe sport either. That is more for like an extended role. Great question here. If our club does not use Plus, do all club members have to join US Rowing? No, if your insurance is not through us, then for practice, they do not need memberships. The only point where they would require membership eventually would be in order to compete in a US Rowing sanctioned event. So if you do not use Plus, not all club members have to be members, but we do recommend that you maintain your roster as best you can. Has US Rowing discussed adding scholarships for memberships to athletes who fall below the poverty line? Yeah, we actually already do this, and we handed out several hundred last year. You can look on our website. We actually have open doors for organizational, which is for smaller teams who specifically have a role such as working only with scholarship athletes. There's more information on that on the website. But then regardless of the status of your team, we have what's called Bridge membership, which is a membership where an athlete pays for basic, but we cover the upgrade for them to championship membership. And we also cover their entry fees for that specific athlete to any US Rowing owned regatta. That's not every regatta, obviously, but that might be your regional. That might be if the athlete would qualify for youth nationals. That is something that is available. And we look at a number of factors there, but a big part of that is essentially where they are in terms of their household income or the situation for their family. So we do have those. We handed out several hundred of them last year, and our program is certainly set up to continue doing that. So yeah, we're happy to be doing that already. And if you want to learn more about it, send me a note. Specific question, and we're coming up on 8 o'clock, but I want to make sure that everything we have in the Q&A we answer. Someone said, if you happen to be at the boathouse during a team change, do you not need safe sport and a background check? No, certainly not a background check. If an athlete has more than 5 interactions a year with minors, if you're an adult and you have more than 5 interactions a year with minors, and that includes 18-year-olds with 17-year-olds, you have to take safe sport training. We have a questionnaire, a self-attestation on your profile that you have to complete, and it asks you, one of those questions is, do you interact with minors more than 5 times a year? If the answer is yes, you have to take safe sport training. If you are not in a position of power representing the team, that doesn't mean you have to do a background check. Food tent volunteers specifically are named in the question. They do not have to do background check and safe sport, in part because their role is so public, as long as they're aware of what your policy is if they were to observe something. If you are an organization that has other groups rowing out at a boathouse, with some of those rowers are members of other clubs, do you need to include all of the rowers for all programs in the club numbers that are claimed for insurance? No. So if those clubs have their own insurance, you are not responsible necessarily for the day-to-day coverage. The only thing I would recommend was make sure that they are covered, which means reviewing that if they have an outside policy, that the outside policy is up to the standards that at least we have set out, would be my recommendation. But no, you do not have to list all of those on your roster in order for them to be covered. It's probably also a good moment to mention the option to do sub-organization membership. If you have a boathouse or you have multiple maybe racing names under your program, as long as you have the room in the tier that you purchase at that facility, say you're the main team and you buy for 150 people, but you only have 100, you can pay $750 to add an additional program name, and that program can use up those remaining 50. So as long as the combined number of the two doesn't go above the total plus, they can do that. If you want to learn more about that, again, send me an email. But in some cases, that might make sense for some larger boathouses. I know there are some foundations that operate boathouses with multiple teams. The foundation buys plus, and then all the teams opt in as suborgs. We're happy to sort that out. If someone has a 2-week learn to row, not everyone becomes a member. Do they need to join US Rowing? Well, again, if that's for more than 3 occasions, they are a recurring participant and they will need basic membership. If it's for less than that, less than 3 occasions, then no, you can, or 3 occasions or less, I should say, no, you can collect a paper waiver from them. And so it kind of hinges at that number, but that's kind of like the standard of where someone is coming regularly enough that we need some more paperwork, and they kind of start counting towards all the totals.
The one thing I'll just say on that, Jules, real quickly, is that
Yep.
as we do rethink the program more broadly in 2025, this is feedback that we've heard. There's a lot behind the scenes and details there that we won't get into here, but we have heard that feedback. So when we go back to the community early next year, we will talk about what would have to be true and what would have to change for us to be able to offer a new form of membership for that.
Yep. Yeah, and just to be clear, also, I'm going through a lot of questions quickly here. That doesn't mean that we haven't thought about this a lot or that we don't hear your concern. But there are a lot of, somewhat more specific questions here. And so if you have specific questions, don't hesitate to reach out. What's 8:04? I want to do one. There was one more question to Q&A. If someone is a member of another club and a US Rowing member, must they be on your club roster as well to be covered for more than 3 rows in a year? Yes, if they're regularly coming to your club, they should be on both rosters. Absolutely. So because they're not covered by their other club when they're at your club. So if someone's regularly coming to your club, absolutely, they should be on your roster, and they count towards your roster for whatever is beyond the 3rd time that they row. So yes, absolutely, they should be on your club roster because they're not insured through that other team when they're with you. That looks like we went through a lot of the questions, or essentially all the questions. One more, that's an easy one. Can you be on more than one roster? Absolutely. The only limitation that's in the rule book is that you cannot be affiliated with more than one team at a regatta. You cannot represent 2 clubs at the same regatta. And there are even some exceptions to that. No, you can be on more than one roster. People do it all the time. Some of the people on this call do it. So no concerns there. Rich, I'm going to send it to you to close the debate at 5
Just
minutes.
a fun fact, though, is that roughly 90% of our members are only affiliated on the roster of one organization. But we do have some that are on up to 15 on that long tail. So fun US Rowing fact for the day. Well, look, this is, as always, a lot of information, and it's a lot to take in, especially with the topic as dense and complex as this can be. What I just want to leave everybody with is just a message that these are the sort of tough, hard, direct conversations that we need to have as a community, not just US Rowing within our 4 walls, but bringing everybody together to talk through these. And so I just want to thank everybody who took the time to join today so much for being part of the conversation, for the really thoughtful questions. And just as reminders that in the letter that I sent and communications, booking time directly with Jules to get specific questions answered, he has cleared his schedule to do so. Our team is here to support you and help you navigate through this as we work through all of this. And so I know it's not an easy message to receive, but it's one that we know is critical, and we really look forward to your partnership as we look ahead even beyond 2024 to what this program looks like and how we can ensure peace of mind and coverage and protection for all of you and for the sport moving forward. So thank you again. And thank you to our partners at Willis Towers Watson for being so generous with their time today as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
More than welcome. Happy to do it.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.